Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz.
Hi, Andrea. Welcome to Plot Twist Radio.
Hi, Erin. So happy to be here.
It's great to have you. Before we get going, can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I'm Andrea Joyce. I am a television sportscaster. I've been in the business for about 40 years, covered 18 Olympics, and the oldest woman still doing sports on TV at 71 years old, which is, I think, the thing I'm most proud of.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I'm impressed. I've watched you actually since I was young. I've always been interested in sports and journalism. And here we are. Before the Olympic Games and national broadcast, what first drew you to sports journalism?
Oh, well, my whole life I was interested in sports. My brothers competed. My father was actually an amazing athlete who could not go to college. He had a scholarship to play football, but couldn't go because he did 2 tours of duty in the South Pacific, Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal. Had to come home and help his father with his business. But I always cared about sports, but I was pre-Title IX, so I never got to compete. I never got to be on any teams or anything. So I always vicariously through everyone else. So I always had the interest and I always knew a lot about it, paid a lot of attention, read the sports section like I read the front section of the paper. So it just came from that. But when I started in the business in television in the late 70s, the only jobs for women in television were weather jobs. Like my first job in TV was I was the weather girl in Colorado Springs. I didn't know anything about the weather. I wasn't a meteorologist. They were only paying $4 an hour. So, they got what they paid for. But that was the only way in. I wanted to be a newscaster, a news reporter, and I couldn't even get a job like that at first. So I didn't really ever dream of being a sportscaster. Or a sports reporter. So this is kind of an amazing twist for me in my life.
Wow. And, that kind of leads me into my next question. It could be a very difficult industry, especially when you first started. What challenges, other than, women being stuck as weather reporters, did you face and how did you navigate around it?
Well, so it's interesting because I did the weather at my first job, and then I had a job offer in Wichita, Kansas, and they were hiring me to do the news, which I was ecstatic that I actually had an opportunity to be a newscaster. And you saw that movie Anchorman, right? You thought it was a comedy. It was a documentary. I mean, it was literally my life. Like that was, that truly happened to me. I will tell you a quick story. Everything they did was designed to get me to laugh at inappropriate times, to, just really try and make me look bad. And they thought they were being funny, but really when you look at it from today's lens, back then, what did you do? You just like sloughed it off and you moved on. There was nothing else you could do. I think it's different today. But anyway, the sports guy had, believe it or not, a segment every Thursday night it was a taxidermy segment, and he had stuffed birds, and he would peck me on the shoulder with the bird while I was reading. And I happened to be reading about one of the popes dying, and I'm like everyone in the studio is laughing because he's poking me with this bird, and I'm on it's voiceover, so you don't see me, but my voice is going like this, and I'm mortified, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's it. I should pack up my stuff. I'm going to get fired. News director after the show says the switchboard, back when there were switchboards, lit up, and people were so touched that I was moved to tears by the Pope's death. I mean, talk about dodging a bullet. Like everyone thought that I was crying. And, these things that you survive and you just, and at the time, there was never a question of, well, do I complain or do I say, you never did that. You just kept putting one foot in front of the other and moving on and moving on. And when I switched to sports in Dallas, Texas, there were only 2 other women in the entire country doing sports, and it was not well received. My news director was very, very progressive and said, I want to be the first in Texas to have a woman doing sports. And the way that I got the job was a whole twist in itself. But that again, people would call the station and say, what the heck is that woman doing on TV? Get her off. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And so I always felt like I had to overcompensate my whole life. Well, not my whole life. I still, because I just am that person too, that I over prepare. But I always felt like I had to know more and be better. And I know that any person of color or any minority has faced the same thing. You have to be better than everyone else so that no one can ever say that you're in that position because you're a woman or you're or whatever. So that's sort of, stuck with me my whole life. And you know what? It's actually worked. So there.
Exactly, it has, because as you said, you've done Olympics, you've done Major League Baseball too, right?
I did many, many years ago. Yeah, I haven't done Major League Baseball in a long time.
That's my favorite. I live for baseball. It's pathetic, really. But this kind of leads me into my next question, was you've interviewed athletes in moments of incredible triumph and also heartbreaking disappointment. Which conversations have stayed with you the longest?
Boy, that's, I mean, with a decades long career, it's tough to narrow it down, but I do think that the toughest ones are the interviews that you do when an athlete does not live up to their own expectations, maybe doesn't live up to the hype, maybe doesn't, they're disappointed in how they personally performed. So that would be like maybe the loser locker room or the loser interview but what ends up happening for me, I think, though, what I've learned over the years is that those are also the interviews they're the most poignant. They're the most honest. They're usually the most honest because that's a moment when an athlete can finally let their guard down and be very, very truthful about their feelings. And it's hard to hide it. I mean, years ago, I interviewed, a guy who had lost to Jimmy Connors, when he should have won, and Jimmy Connors was, half retired and had one arm and a dead wrist, and that was an incredible moment. Just this past Olympics, interviewing Ilia Malinin when he was supposed to be, without question, the Olympic gold medalist, and the Olympic pressure, as much of it sounds like a cliche, it did hit him, and he never thought that it would. And when he came off the ice, so at an Olympics, I'm in a mixed zone. It's called a mixed zone, so it's right off of the ice backstage, and athletes come through and they do an interview right after they get their scores. But when it's a medal round, like after the long program, if they make the podium, we have to wait until after the national anthem and after they get their medals, and then they come through. So I always have time to think and get prepared. Well, he came in 8th, which was not on anybody's bingo card. Like, that was not what anyone was prepared for. And so he got his scores, and 30 seconds later, he's standing in front of me. Now, I've known him for years. I actually covered his parents back in the 90s when they were skaters. That's how long I've been around. In fact, when I saw his mom for the first time after all of those years in 2022, when he was first competing at senior nationals, I went over and I said hello to her, and she said, "You're still here?" I said, "I am." But anyway, but he came back, and it obviously helps that he knows me, he trusts me, and I've built that trust. And that's one of the other things I'm most proud of, is that the athletes who know me know that they can trust me, that that my integrity is the most important thing to me, that I'm never dishonest with them, that I'm never trying to get them. And I just asked very, very honest questions that you as a viewer would be home and be wondering the same thing. What was your first thought when that music ended? And he had completely, like, done something that nobody had ever seen before. The way that he didn't do what he's capable of doing, didn't even come close. And his first words were, "I blew it." And then he started talking about it and what that moment was like. And I feel like that's really our job as reporters, is to try to tap into, we're trying to share this moment. And as difficult as it is for athletes, I mean, can you imagine having the biggest mistake of your life and then having somebody ask you, "Well, so, Aaron, what's this moment like for you?" I mean, and have millions of people be listening to it. It's unfathomable to me. So to approach it with as much compassion as you can, and yet the same amount of toughness as well, is, I think, a delicate balance.
Yes, and bring up a great point, because I don't know how I would handle that, to be honest, because I would feel like I was
Either.
falling apart,
Me neither.
Yeah, that's rough. And I'm so glad that you're one of the reporters that doesn't try the gotcha right after, because they're going through it. And
I would say it's not necessarily a soft approach as it's a compassionate approach, because you're trying to put yourself in their shoes, but at the same time you have to ask what happened. You have to uphold your journalistic end of things. But I think that there are ways of doing that aren't without feeling. So I think that again, it's a delicate balance. And we had so many dramatic and heartbreaking and joyful moments at this year's Olympics in Milan. Amber Glenn, who has battled, her mental demons for years, walked away from the sport for a while to get, help with, her whole mental approach. And she's worked so, so, so hard on it. And to see her go out there and not be able to grab it the way that we know she can, the way that we saw her compete at national championships when she won in an Olympic year and handle that pressure. And I remember, before she skated for the final time, before the free skate, she said, "I just want to have that one Olympic moment I dreamed of my whole life." And I said, "Well, what is that moment?" Because she was out of the medals, she wasn't going to win a medal. And she said, "I just want to skate." I get goosebumps thinking, "I just want to skate over those Olympic rings and put my arms up and be happy with what I've done." And she did that in the free skate. And it was just so, so we could revisit that moment. It was remarkable, so, yeah, it's, I have a great job. It's really amazing.
It is, and this is actually a question that I've wondered. And as you were telling that story, it kind of popped up. When I interview people, I learned so much from them. Have these athletes taught you anything about handling pressure?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm in awe of how they handle themselves. I'm so much older, and I don't know that, I guess you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it's I marvel at how they handle themselves. I absolutely marvel at how they handle themselves. And I think that more than anything, what it has taught me is to remember that, and again, it sounds like a cliche and it sounds very simplistic, but that we all are human. I remember Simone Biles, I covered gymnastics for 30 years, and I remember Simone Biles saying, "We are not just athletes, we are not just entertainment, we're humans." And, we tend to, I think that we sometimes tend to forget that, she's not a machine. She's a human being with feelings, and she has anxieties, and she has insecurities just like the rest of us. It doesn't seem like it, when she goes out there and performs the way that she does. And I think that it's a reminder to me when I watch them, how they handled the pressure. It's a reminder to be in awe of that, but also to always remember that they're human beings.
Yes, very well said. And you have a book about Simone, do you not?
It's a young reader's book. I was approached and asked to write a young reader's book on the world's greatest gymnasts, women, female gymnasts. And so Simone is on the cover, and so of course her story is one of them. But it was really, really fun for me to write because I've covered the sport for so many years, and I told the publishers, I said, I keep meticulous notes, believe it or not, on legal pads. It hasn't all been transferred to a computer. And I have quotes that I often use for my interviews. And I was able to go back into my files for many of the, some of the athletes, obviously, competed long before, way before I was born, so we went through the history of this sport. But I would say about half of them who are in the book, I have interviewed many times. And so I had notes, and I was able to include that and make it more of a personal book as opposed to just, this is the bio of this gymnast. And it's a picture book, it's pictures with, like one page of copy about that person. I have a friend who's a librarian out at a middle school in California, and they have the book in the library. And she said, it's one of the most popular books that the girls like jump to, and which makes me very happy.
Yes, and I had just ordered a copy actually this morning because as I was getting ready for the
Oh, wow.
interview for my daughter, because she's in middle school and she's an
Oh, wow.
athlete.
Oh,
So
wow. Well, the stories are incredible. And the great thing about the book is that you can just pick it up and just, you see a gymnast that you're curious about. And some of these women in the 40s who had to take, a 10-year break because of the war, and come back and be in hiding, this Jewish gymnast who was in hiding and was training on a log, for a balance beam in the forest, and while she was in hiding. I mean, some of the stories are just remarkable. And so it's fun. It's a fun book just to be able to pick up and read one story and, feel like that person a little bit.
very cool. Well, I know that she will love it, and I'll probably steal it from her so I can take a look too. So, I love a good book, especially ones, with pictures. I don't know what it is about me, but I like pictures. It makes the book interesting.
Exactly.
So, Let's switch over to the Olympics solely. What do viewers at home never see that goes into a live Olympic broadcast? Because I would imagine there's quite a bit that goes into it.
Oh, wow. Well, there is. I think that you see more now than you used to. Back in the day, it was just the competition and the competition's over and that's it. But now, we have cameras at practices, we have cameras in news conferences, everything streams live, so you end up seeing a lot more now than you used to. But I think that what people don't see is really the preparation not just by me and the other broadcasters, but by the entire production team and what it takes to put something like that on. I mean, we're at NBC, we're doing Olympics every 2 years, so when they changed that in the 90s, when it used to be both the winter and summer games were in the same year, and then you waited 4 years, then they decided winter, and then 2 years later summer, and then 2 years later winter, so they spread them out that way, so which is great because we don't have to wait 4 years. But the preparation, like the preparations for LA 2028 started years ago. And it's full on now, but it truly started the minute that LA got that bid. The minute it was announced that they got the bid, NBC is on the ground and they are running, and there are people already, they already know which events are going to be on which nights. There's a schedule there, there are things that are in place already, which seems like, gee, you have so much time, but right up until the minute you go on, there are changes and there are all kinds of things that are happening around you that, sometimes I'm trying to think if there's anything in particular I can remember. I mean, being in Sochi, Russia was very interesting. We were not sure how the competition was going to play out, especially for figure skating, where you have some LGBTQ, members of that community. And, Russia famously, just saying that we don't tolerate anyone who's gay in this country. And we didn't know how that was going to be handled and how they were going to treat them. And so right up until the time you're on the air, you don't know what's happening. But for the most part, I think it's really the preparation that people don't see, like the hours and hours and hours it takes, and the hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people who put these things together. It's when you look, when they win an Emmy, you look at the list of people who contributed, and it's like you're the only one who didn't get an Emmy for Paris.
But I can't imagine. It must take so much, because just doing this podcast takes a lot. So
Oh,
to
sure.
do something so big as the Olympics, it really does
Yeah.
take a lot of people to make it a well-oiled machine. And I will say NBC has done a great job with it.
One of our bosses, Molly Solomon, is a dear friend of mine, and it's very interesting. I always tell young people when I speak, you want to be you want to carry yourself in a certain way in any business and be nice to everyone always. No matter where they are on the food chain, no matter where they are on the ladder. And she's a perfect example. She started as a researcher at NBC, and now she is the vice president of Olympic operations. I think that's her title. But she's really one of our huge bosses, and makes gigantic decisions along with our friend Gary Zenkel. And so if you were working with her when she was a researcher and you were not nice to her, I mean, you might be thinking twice about it. But it's to me, it always, that picture that it paints is that, for those of us in this business, it is a lifelong commitment, and you have such passion for it. And she has such passion for the Olympics, as do I, always have. And it's so important for me to be at those games, and so important for me to try and tell the world, people who can't be there, try to bring them in, try to give them a front row seat into what's happening, and make them part of it, because it's an incredible experience.
Yes, absolutely. And you've done an excellent job of that.
Thanks.
Is there a favorite Olympics that you've covered?
I think that when I look, so it's 18, which is a lot, but I think that my favorite was probably Lillehammer in 1994, but mainly because times were different then. It was this is pre-internet. This is pre-social media. This is, nobody had a cell phone. And it was small enough. The Olympics were they're still huge, but it was small enough that they could hold it in a place like Lillehammer. They could never do that now. The Olympics has grown, and it's, the Winter Olympics are always smaller than the summer games, because the summer games, there are more events and more sports. But we were in a hotel, and we were right on what was called the Stor, and that was the main pedestrian street. And the athletes were accessible. It was pre 9/11. After 9/11, everything changed. The security, the access to the athletes, and the security to get to your event and to the athletes was just phenomenal, which they had to do, but back then, simpler times, before all of that, in Lillehammer, I remember being in a local restaurant filled with local people. And that day there had just been the cross country relay race, which was a country, you compete against countries, and it's like a 3-hour race, and it's like their Super Bowl. We treated it like a Super Bowl because it was Norway's Super Bowl, and they were favored to win. And right down to the wire, the Italian gets his nose of his ski out in front of the Norwegian, and they win the gold medal, and Norway wins silver. And there's hundreds of thousands of people out there watching, and it's just like, oh my God, no one could believe it. Now, it was just one of but everybody seemed, very gracious about it. So we're at this restaurant that night, and in walks the Italian cross country team. Now, this would be like the Boston Red Sox showing up in New York, at a restaurant after beating the Yankees in the World Series or something. And it was dead silence for 5 seconds. And then all of a sudden, everyone in the restaurant stood up and cheered the Italian team. All these Norwegians who had just had their hearts broken stood up and cheered this team. And that, to me, well, so that can happen. It doesn't happen now so much because the athletes are sequestered and they're not out with, hanging around people. But to me, it was such a simpler time to be able to experience that, but it also sent such an incredible message about what the Olympics are really truly all about. And it's about celebrating more about what brings us together as opposed to what pulls us apart, and that sense of community and that sense of respect for each other and respect for an athlete who, the cross country, these athletes are training their entire lives in relative obscurity, and they get this moment. And then to have that moment happen, it was just a reminder of why the Olympics are so incredibly special. But it was just, and Norway is just a magical kind of a place, it's, so that probably was one of my favorites. Paris, in more modern times, I would say that Paris was incredible. Paris was, they did an absolutely incredible job of making sure that the entire city kind of embraced the Olympics, and everybody who was there, whether they went to a single event or not, felt part of it. And it was truly, truly wonderful. And I will also say that, as I ramble on, I've covered the last 3 Paralympics in person. And I would say that the Paralympics for me has been life-changing, and those are favorites on a different level. I feel like it changed my life covering those games. So, it's how I look at the world and how I look at people with disabilities. It's really, really something.
Yeah. And I think it's so important that they have the Paralympics. My son and I, we will sit and watch the Paralympics. He loves it. Because he loves sports and he wants to be able to participate. So I'm so glad that that's out there now.
Well,
And
it's interesting because, NBC has covered it for many years, and it's only been in the last decade that, they've really put more, just so much more effort and so much more money into it. And the woman who is the executive producer is a dear friend of mine. I actually officiated her wedding. And talk about, full circle. She was an intern for us at the Olympics for figure skating in 2006 in Torino, and then worked her way up. And she's an incredibly bright person, Alexa Pritting. And she is now in charge of all of the Paralympic coverage. And she takes such care. And we have sensitivity training, before we go, and, reminding people that there is a huge difference between saying, here's, Sally, she's a disabled athlete, but the proper way to say that is that she's an athlete who happens to have a disability. They're athletes first. The disability is second to what, and this whole sense of, being so inspired. It's more like you're inspired by the incredible strength and fortitude and determination. Not, oh, gee, she doesn't have legs, good for her. It completely changes the way that we're presenting it. I hope is it helps people to see the Paralympics in that way, and I'm in awe. In Milan, I went back and I did sled hockey, and these guys are rock stars. I mean, it's incredible to watch them, and it's now like my favorite sport.
I love that. Yeah, I remember watching that and I was like, wow, that's really talented.
Oh man, it's very violent. It's more violent than stand-up hockey, so anyway.
Yeah, I love that though. So, where can the audience find you? I mean, I know you're on NBC, but socials or anything like that?
Well, I'm not really good at all of that. I usually just post pictures of my dog. I'm not an active participant on, Facebook or Instagram, but I am on both of those. Andy Joyce, is my handle, because I was always Andy with an I my whole life. But I don't, I don't do TikTok. I don't do anything like that, but I'm mostly NBC, and I also work the US Open tennis every year for the USTA. We do what's called the World Feed. So we cover the event and send out all of the interviews and all of the matches to networks all around the world. So if you're in Cambodia, and you would see me, covering tennis, but it's working for the USTA, and it's an event that I've covered for 30 years. I did it for CBS for a long time. And then the USTA asked me to stay on and work for them on the World Feed. And I love it. I get to work with some of my best friends, Mary Carrillo, and, it's really terrific. But other than that, it's funny because people say, well, when are you going to retire? You're 71. And I said, well, I'm kind of like half retired because I don't go to an office every day. I mean, I work really hard at the events I work, and I prepare, and prepare to within an inch of my life. And my preparation for the Olympics starts, it's ongoing, because I do figure skating events all year round. And then, I'm keep all of those notes, and I have all of that for the Olympics. But because I don't have to go to an office every day, this year was particularly busy with the Olympics and the Paralympics and World Championships. But now I'm kind of free for, until August when I start the US Open. So I don't know if they keep calling, I'm not sure I'll retire until I have to, I guess.
You love it though. So
I do love it. I do love it. I really, really love it, and feel so incredibly fortunate to be part of so many incredible moments. It's really something.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm a little jealous. I'm not gonna lie. No, I'm a lot jealous, really. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an honor. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so happy to talk with you.